Welcome back. Our next guest is Terry Williams. Terry's here to talk to us about his latest book, The Brain-Based Boss, but he's also the author of this wonderful advisory for teenagers and their parents, The Guide, How to Kiss, Get a Job, and other stuff you need to know. So Terry's a man who's challenged himself to become an author and a stand-up comedian. And it's a great pleasure to say a good evening to my special guest, Terry Williams. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Neville.
Okay, this is the book show, so we're talking about books, and you have written a couple.
Yes. Back in 2008, I wrote a guidebook for young people, life skills, told in a humorous and non-preachy way, called The Guide, How to Kiss, Get a Job, and Other Stuff You Need to Know.
Okay.
And more recently, completely differently, a book called The Brain-Based Boss, How to Increase Employee Engagement at Work and Tap into People's Internal Motivations.
First of all, let's get a wee look at who was Terry Williams.
Well, probably 13 years ago, I started this my thing. Whereas every year I would set myself a New Year's resolution of doing 2 new dangerous things a year. My kids were growing up, I was in a bit of a sameness job, senior management role, local government, telecommunications, same. I want to break out of this. And that first 2 dangerous things in that first year was snow skiing and stand-up comedy. And I had absolutely no background, I was never the class clown. But I thought, no, this will scare me, this will stretch me, this will push me through the comfort zone. And so I did it, and I did it again, killed my first night out, died on my bum, the second and third, got back on the horse and been doing it now for 13 years. So I guess I've been living, as you've noticed over this time, a bit of a double life, serious businessman by day, professional MC, comedian, speaker by night.
Yep.
And it got to a point probably about 2 days before the global economic crisis where I quit the day job.
Yep.
This is a bit of advice they always give you is never quit the day job. And I did it. I sold the house, set up my shop, and been writing and speaking and comedying ever since.
The Guide, How to Kiss, Get a Job, and Other Stuff You Need to Know. What was the germination of that?
Well, again, pretty much my own children. It's quite from a selfish perspective. That book's aimed at 15 to 25-year-olds.
Yep.
Setting them up for everything they could want to know before they get to my age, basically. From really rudimentary stuff, how to wash your clothes, how to cut your toenails, through to getting a flat, getting a job, office politics, relationships, through to some quite heavy stuff, death and drugs and depression.
Right.
All sourced from experts in one concise place, user-friendly, accessible style, tinged with humour throughout, some great cartoons in there that make a real point. And parents are buying it for their kids, leaving it lying around, it's getting discovered, it's in all the schools, it's in all the libraries. And in a little way, every day making the world just a little bit better place.
All right.
But primarily, selfish start.
Yeah.
My own kids have got it.
Nevertheless, it sort of reminds me about process. Do you do all of the research first and then just write, or do you write and research as you go along and edit yourself, as it were?
I go for bulk. I go for the shotgun approach first, and then I start narrowing down to a laser.
Yep.
So it's different to a degree because we had almost carte blanche the first time out from the publisher.
Yeah.
And their only constraint was that it be not preachy.
Yes.
Because they had another project lined up, loved it to bits, but just way too preachy. So we walked in 3 minutes later and pitched our idea saying, it's this, but it's not preachy.
Right.
Just total luck.
Yeah.
And so there was no constraints on the topics or the style, but as we amassed just so, what do you need to know in life? And once you discover something about drugs, that raises something about mental illness and all this other stuff. So, and then we start prioritising. Okay, well, what do you need to know, and what order do you need to know it?
Yeah.
And so we came up with kind of an onion model. So at the hub of it is yourself, and beyond that your family, beyond that your relationships, and beyond that the community you're in, and then the last layer of the onion is the big bad world.
Right.
And so that suddenly, once we had that model, all the content fell into place. So I guess to answer your question is I start wide, go through a process of discovery, and then come up with some simple models which the book hangs on, which if you remember nothing else, you'll take away those models. And that's certainly the case in The Brain-Based Boss.
All right. Well, good. Well, we'll come to that. Except I want to ask you, are we still doing the downhill skiing?
Not as often as I'd like,
right.
But I live to tell the tale and my knees are fully intact, so I've got no problems with that whatsoever.
All right, skiing, stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedy, it occurred to me, it's a bit about writing as well, really.
Well, by definition, you know, I mean, there's no one in New Zealand who's who's telling anybody else's jokes, and that's the beauty of, and the hard part of being a comedian, or indeed anything else in New Zealand. If you're a plumber, you know, you start out, you do your own books, you paint your own wagon, and all the rest of it until you get enough capital to, you know, get someone else to do that. And that's definitely the case with a comedian. You start out as an amateur doing it for the love, the exposure, and the occasional free beer.
Yep.
Until suddenly you value what you do, and you free milks and cow and all the rest of it.
All right.
And certainly in the time that I've been doing it, it's really professionalised now. For 8 years, I was secretary of the New Zealand Comedy Guild, which was our union.
Yep.
Which a union of comedians, a little bit like herding burning cats, but it's worked. Along with some other things have happened in that time as well, with some international success and some other TV projects that have come along that have really created this pyramid and this career path, where it's not laughable that kids coming out of school, coming out of uni, can think, yeah, I can be a professional comedian and buy a house at some point, just like a plumber can. The
brain-based boss. So this is a fair way, I would have thought. Just the title says this is a fair way from the guide for teenagers and stand-up comedy to adding serious value through employee engagement.
Well, it's not a million miles away in its origin. I was emceeing the national awards, the series of national awards for the dairy industry. And as part of that, I got all their community, all their regional conveners together for a bit of a motivational session and spoke to them for an hour. And one of the dairy farmers from Northland, Murray Jameson, came up to me with a question about one of his staff, whose nickname was Sleepy. Well, that's always a good start, you know, I think. Okay.
Yep.
And I couldn't answer his question. You know, how can you motivate someone whose nickname is Sleepy, who does just enough? They punch the clock, they consume oxygen, they perform. They punch the clock, they go home. And you can see the potential in there. He's not trying to be a slave driver. He's just simply trying to turn this guy on to be all he can be.
Yeah.
And Sleepy doesn't want a bar of it. And I didn't have an answer to his question, so he kind of put me on the spot. And I thought, so I started the research and looking into ended up being over 100 psychological studies and papers and books and so forth. What do you do with someone who's got potential, but their fire has not yet been lit?
Right.
And suddenly I had all this research. I should do something with this. I should turn it into a training program because I do that. I should turn it into something online and say, I've written a book. Why wouldn't I write another book? And so it became a book.
So if I'm the head of a big corporation, or I'm a two-person plumber's shop, differences appeal to both?
I think the driving philosophy behind the book is individualisation and customisation. That everyone's different. So the initial approach is self-awareness. So we give you some tools to be, well, what is your style when it comes to motivation? You know, just what works for you doesn't necessarily work for anybody else. And a lot of us, be they CEOs of large corporations or mom and pop operations, their philosophy is, treat others as you would like to be treated, which sounds great, but that's not true. One man's chocolate fish is a treat, and another man it's unnecessary calories.
Yeah.
And so it's all about be aware of your own drives and styles, and then to look for clues in the behaviour of others.
Right.
So it's all about observing behaviours. And it's not necessarily about doing surveys and ticking boxes because some consultant says you should. All this stuff you can do yourself. It's a bit harder, obviously, if you're a CEO of a company with hundreds of employees because you cannot physically be there. But you can tool up your second level, third tier leaders with those skills to do it themselves and just keep them on their toes.
So you'd say, if I asked you, you'd say this is the big blue pill and everybody should buy it. But is it aimed at some groups more than others, do you think?
Well, just to grab the blue pill thing, I think it's more like the pick and mix at the supermarket in a chemist shop, which has got lots of different kind of pills and you can choose whichever ones you want.
Right.
I think primarily it would be benefiting any kind of employer and anyone who's in a leadership role. And that's quite broad, so I think particularly those who are starting out. There's definitely some refresher value in there for those who are already genuinely successful in leadership roles. And I must admit, I meet some who say that about the book. Hey, it was a great refresher. And I know these people. I think, you might think you know this stuff, but are you actually applying it?
Yes.
So they might be lacking a little bit in the self-awareness department. But most of the feedback I'm getting from is frontline supervisors and those who are on their way up the ranks becoming that.
Right.
So it's really useful collection of studies, but it's not written as an academic tome or anything like that. There's a fair degree of humour throughout it as well.
I was going to say, you're listing the attributes it has before. It has some of that trademark Terry Williams humour and the light-hearted touch to make the point.
Exactly right, and that's exactly the point, Neville, is it's always to make the point. When I run a training program, I always tell them at the start, I confess that I'm also a comedian, and if you're worried that you're being trained by a clown in serious business topics, don't worry. Fun helps to reinforce the learning, but every time we do something even remotely humorous, there's always a serious reason behind it, and that's to reinforce the learning or to help make a point.
I think there's a lot in here that I can learn as well. And the thing I like is that it's something that I can keep going back to. Well, we'll have you back when you write your next book and you can tell us just how successful this is. Or maybe the world will have changed because everybody's following that advice.
That's fantastic. I hope so. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Neville.
Thanks very much.
Cheers.
We'll be back right after the break.